Hi, welcome to Blogging Heads TV. This is Culturally Determined. I'm your host, Aryeh Cohen-Wade, and my guest is Michael Sweeney. Michael, please introduce yourself.
My name is Michael Sweeney. I'm a film and television editor and also a huge Game of Thrones fan.
Right, so we are coming to you 10:50 p.m., barely half an hour after the end of the finale to Game of Thrones. We've done a couple of these episodes before. This will presumably be the last one, but who knows? Because, it seems like possible sequels are set up by this episode or spin-off series. What did you think of the finale episode of Game of Thrones?
Felt like it was not great. I got sort of pulled in again on the previous episode, which I liked a lot. And this seems like it was sort of a feint in that direction. And then they're like backing up to, hey, what if we had a ending where we saw what happened to all our favorite characters and everyone was happy? Which I felt like was significantly less interesting than the direction they were setting themselves up to go in.
So we'll be talking about the entire final season. The last episode we did was after the first episode, but plenty of stuff has happened in the subsequent 5 episodes. So I actually liked it, and I think that's putting me in a minority. My wife. I asked if she hated it, and she said, "What's worse than hate?" And she has some friends who she was texting with, and they all pretty much uniformly disliked it as well. So it kind of seemed like, and especially after when they jump forward like a couple months, or it's unclear how long, during the scene where they're having the Council of Nobles, I was thinking like this kind of seems like fan fiction. It was like, what would happen? How would this work out? Well, if we had to have a new small council, like who would be on it? Well, who would be the Grand Maester? Well, I guess it would be Sam. And it was kind of this connect the dots kind of thing. And there was some very cheesy elements of it. It was
like the end credits of Animal House where they say, what happened to each character.
This one became a senator and so on. Sansa, that lovable character, she becomes Queen of the North, and we're all happy about that. The only one who kind of gets a crappy fate is Jon Snow, sentenced to once again join the Night's Watch, and he doesn't seem, all that happy about it, but the final scene, which we'll talk about, shows that he seems to be doing something that he feels is a good thing to be doing. So I would give it kind of a B+, and it's notorious that these long prestige TV shows have unsatisfactory endings. The Sopranos one was people are still debating it, and most people were disappointed and Lost. It's hard to even more. There are more characters on the show, more plot lines. How could they wrap it all up? More fan investment. Like it seems like it was probably going to be a letdown unless they pulled off something crazy. And I guess they kind of did do something crazy, which was having Jon murder Dany. So what did you think of that?
It seemed like a somewhat convenient way out of the plot that they had written themselves into, where, she's surrounded by bodyguards moments earlier, and then she is suddenly, lets Jon, who she knows is a rival to the throne, into her chamber, without even frisking him. So it seems sort of unrealistic. I mean, that's a strange word to use about a scene with a dragon looming over it. But it sort of seemed reverse engineered, that they were trying to get to that moment without really making it make sense.
Yeah, they were setting, like, the previous episode where Daenerys lays waste to King's Landing, and then the first 15, 20 minutes of this one, we're setting her up to be a kind of neoconservative fascist leader or something who's gonna make the world safe for. It's not like democracy, and there was this little bit later on where they were kind of invented democracy and then dismissed it, but just we'll make the world good, and if we have to kill half the world in order to do that, well, that's just the price you have to pay. And the first part of the episode looked really cool. It looked like some sort of it looked better than the times when Star Wars has tried to do the fascist kind of stuff, just the way it was shot, and the colors were all really cool and look cool. So they could have thought out the consequences of Dany being this dictatorial, like someone who thinks she's doing good for the world through her firepower and dragon firepower, and that would have been an interesting dark ending. But they decided not to do that, and I don't know. Like I said, there was a fan fiction element, and I'm sure people will write like other fan fiction where Jon does not kill Dany. There's been a couple of moments in the show where two people embrace, and then you hear that one of them has gotten stabbed, and you're not sure which one. And they did it with Roose and Ramsay Bolton in like season 4 or 5. And then this was a similar moment where you hear the knife going in, and you're like, wait, which one stabbed which? And then it became clear that Jon stabbed Dany, but they could have had Dany stab Jon, and that would have made just as much sense, I feel like.
Maybe more sense. I don't know. I thought, it's interesting because there's this sort of fascist element to it, but it really reminded me, it was sort of like totalitarian communism, where it was sort of this international movement of the slaves and the lower class against the upper class, and they're going to go liberate the entire world. And, obviously there is something sort of genocidal and tyrannical about this, but it's also like you could kind of talk me into it. I don't know, like seeing the nobles of Westeros sort of stage this coup to reassert their control over the kingdom. It's like maybe a little more mixed than I think the creators want it to be, or at least in my view. There's this sort of like maybe we should break the wheel. I don't know.
Yeah, so that's interesting. And the Unsullied are slaves who were freed by Dany, and the Dothraki are nomads. And I thought what I thought she was going to say to the Dothraki was like, go run out and like pillage and do whatever you want in the countryside, and like do what you would naturally do if you were like sacking places. But she didn't say that. So what? But yeah, they are, the Dothraki are the ambiguously ethnic others of this world, and
the white Mongols, I guess.
Yeah, they seem to be. It seems like the Dothraki can encompass any race, but a lot of them have darker skin, and they're kind of like the savages and a combination of like the Mongols and maybe Native Americans and other like tribal groups. But yeah, so that's interesting that it wasn't like. It was like, the dispossessed are going to bring freedom, but like this will be messy, and if we have to like destroy the village in order to save it, then like that's okay. So yeah, why don't we? Let's talk a little bit about the previous episode, which I think divided the fans very strongly, and especially along gender lines, and. You sent me a link to someone making an affirmative case for like why it made sense for Dany to destroy the city by fire, and we'll link to that.
Yeah, I think that's sort of like the third take, where it's like it's good that she did this in some ways, or at least this is something that is rational for her to have done in her position. Mm-hmm. It's the piece is by Aaron Beatty in the LA Review of Books, and I think it makes a fairly compelling case that. Like, Dany is in a situation where she has been betrayed by basically everyone around her, and she's running out of allies, and her only option really is to sort of like be a dragon, as Olenna advised her to, where she knows she's going to continue losing if she sort of waits for these idiot men around her to give her terrible advice, and she sort of has no choice but to rule by terror. And like that sounds extremely dark, and it is extremely dark, but there's sort of like a philosophical tradition that you could justify this with, where you sort of say Westeros is this feudal medieval state of nature where everyone is at war with everyone all the time, and she's like literally Leviathan in the Hobbes conception. And you really need someone who has this immense power, who can take a monopoly in the use of force to sort of to break the wheel, to end the cycle of violence that the world lives under. I think that's not something everyone would agree with, or everyone would consider a reasonable take on the themes of the series, but I thought it was at least extremely interesting, and sort of disappointing to see that the show didn't go further in that direction.
Yeah, it is an interesting essay, and I think we talked about this in our previous episode, but like it seemed like a theme of the show was like there's really no such thing as a good king.
Right.
They all end up failing, and then there was this idea that like Dany could be the good queen, and she would break the cycle. But yeah, the part in the episode where Sam like invents democracy and then gets laughed out is kind of was funny, and points to like what would be the like kind of happy like version of this, like how would it of someone sitting on the Iron Throne, like how would it play out? And they if democracy ever like evolves in Westeros, it'll happen. It'll take many millennia, it seems like. And there is this kind of like in the books, especially, there's this kind of like lack of historical progress in Westeros. It's like
right.
like they never invent new technology or like really come up with new ideas. Like it's kind of they're like stuck in this eternal Middle Ages. So what could could she be a good queen if we realize from a modern point of view that having a like all powerful monarch is never gonna do a good job. So maybe just us never seeing the rule of Dany is a better way to play that. I don't know exactly.
I mean, there was I can't remember. I think it was either Matt Iglesias or Dylan Matthews at Vox who had a series of takes where they're like Cersei apologists because she had employed Qyburn, and Qyburn is like the only one who is able to produce new technology in the world.
Right, so that's the mega crossbow thing, and
and he's like doing all these medical experiments and like
zombieism or whatever, Frankensteinism.
The only way out of the Malthusian trap of the late Middle Ages is to go with Qyburn, which I think is sort of a trolly and sarcastic take, but sort of plays into that mysterious lack of technological progress in the world, which is, I guess, I know learning about the books, that's a larger element of the books, and there's a lot of fan theories about, the Maesters are this like conspiracy to keep Westeros technologically backwards. Or
that's funny. I haven't heard that. I mean, if you really are like sitting down and thinking about it, like how this world works, like somehow the planet is orbiting like around a sun or is tilting a certain way that like the seasons are inconsistent and last years and years. So it doesn't seem like there's any way that could make sense with the physics that we understand. So something different is happening in this world, or they're in a flat world or something. Although, like at the end, Arya sails off to the west to see what's there. So presumably something's there, not just like falling off the edge.
It was sort of in the back of my mind that not that they would ever do this, but a funny end to the series would be like Arya just sailing off the end of the world, like in Monty Python.
Right? Yeah, the flat earthers would appreciate. Would appreciate that one. But just the other thing from the previous episode was that a lot of female fans identified with Dany as a character and felt like really betrayed by her turning into like the Mad Queen, or her deciding to burn 1 million people to death. And there's hundreds or thousands of babies have been named Khaleesi or Daenerys over the past 10 years. And there are a lot of jokes about that. And I think, it shows how like, hungry women pop culture consumers out there were for a character who was strong and, morally good, and who they could identify with. And there really aren't a lot of them in popular culture. Like Wonder Woman is a recent one, and Rey from the second or the third trilogy of Star Wars is another one. But I couldn't think of any other ones besides that.
There's two in Game of Thrones where you have Brienne and Arya, who are both heroic and sort of kick-ass women. Brienne ends up being, I guess, the captain of the Kingsguard at the end of this, and
that's true.
Arya,
I think.
Explore the world.
Yeah, Arya it's different because also the other element is that like Dany's beautiful, and it's especially in the books, like Brienne is described as like kind of looking like a man, and people are like, what is this freak? And then Arya starts off as a tomboyish child, and then grows into a kind of a young woman. So yeah, it's kind of the like men would get Superman or Batman to or Iron Man to identify with. And the female lead would always be the woman who needed to be rescued or whatever. So just having this character turn heel, I think was seen as a betrayal by a lot of fans, and one of my wife's friends texted her tonight that she wasn't going to watch any more TV series at all because she's just like done with TV series after this one. So I mean that shows the strength of the connection that people built to this world, but also they fumbled it, or they decided that they wanted to. They did something that they knew would piss off a lot of the fans.
Yeah, and I think I tweeted something to this effect where it was like, it doesn't automatically make the ending of your prestige TV show good if you've pissed off your least savvy fans, but it's probably necessary. Sopranos, I think, was a very good example of this, where the dumbest Sopranos fans were always very hungry for more mafia stuff, and they're like, who's going to get whacked this week, right, and who's on top, and the ending of Sopranos was, I think, very self-consciously trying to sort of deny that and make that as unexciting as possible, where the big bad of the final season is whacked by this guy that is not on the show, basically.
Well, in one possible interpretation of the ending.
Yeah, and Tony himself is, sort of whacked mysteriously. We could go into the Sopranos ending, but
yeah, we'll skip over that. But I mean, kind of the difference is that Sopranos was kind of an elite phenomenon, at least at first, whereas Game of Thrones quickly became a mass phenomenon, as much as that can happen with an HBO TV show. People who didn't watch Mad Men or Breaking Bad, still got really into Game of Thrones. And I feel like it entered the culture in ways that a lot of other prestige TV hasn't. And yeah, but people getting whacked in the world of Westeros is a key feature of the show. It's not just there to satisfy the rubes. It's the moment that Ned gets whacked in season 1 is the moment when everyone said, "Oh my god, what the fuck? I can't believe that happened. This is something totally new in the genre." So so that
subversion of sort of the fantasy tropes. I think there was a lot of people who were out there who were hungry for the fantasy tropes to be realized.
Yeah.
And I think if you're paying any attention to the show, that it's not really trying to go in that direction. And I was sort of afraid that it would go in that direction, and that you would have, good Queen Dany on the Iron Throne, or you would have, good King John on the Iron Throne. I'm so pleased to see it not end like that. But the people who sort of wanted it to be girl power for Dany, I always thought, it's not what the show is trying to do. And I think it would have been dishonest to her character to have it play out like that.
Yeah. So speaking of the throne, I think we made some predictions, or at least I did in our previous episode. And my prediction was that the Night King would be sitting on the Iron Throne at the end. So I was very wrong about that. And, I think I said that too, did I? What did I say? Maybe I did. I should have re-listened before taping this, but that was my argument was that that it was this is not original to me. It was a metaphor for climate change, and there's all this squabbling among the nobles of Westeros while this mounting threat is coming, and then they fail to be able to counter it because they ignored it. So that would have been a nice, dark, thematically appropriate, although I guess this one somewhat predictable ending since I predicted it. And so they didn't do that. And then I think there were people who, the episode where the Battle of Winterfell episode attracted a lot of criticism for a lot of reasons. It was sometimes hard to understand what was happening because it was really dark. Parts of it, if these characters are acting with strategic knowledge, and the fact that they have 2 dragons, it didn't really seem like they used that. And yeah, it was kind of a trudge through the killing zombie after zombie after zombie, and then it was not only one or two of the main characters died, and it was supposed to be the climactic battle of this world, so that seemed a little cheap. But I think a lot of people were happy with Arya killing the Night King, and I certainly was excited when that moment happened. So what did you think of them getting rid of the White Walker plotline halfway through this final season? Yeah, it seems like it was a little bit of a letdown. I really liked that the Arya plot paid off so well.
that, the years and years of assassin school, all of a sudden it all actually,
Right.
it was all for something. I didn't really get, some people criticized it, but they said, oh, she's this Mary Sue and she comes out of nowhere. It's like, well, I think they went out of their way to like establish that Arya is extremely good at fighting, and it's
I think that was a really stupid criticism. So for people who don't know, Mary Sue is kind of this fan term for like a projection of a fan character like into the universe who's just like who can like do no wrong kind of, and everyone likes, and so there's like this gendered aspect to it of it like. Maybe it comes from like fan fiction or something that like the
I'm not
person
really sure what the origin is.
Who writes fan fiction would insert themselves into the Star Trek universe and be able to solve all the problems, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, like, she, they show her getting like hit in the face by the trainers at the 10,000 Faces house or whatever that place is called, like a lot of times, and she gets stabbed and she has to do all sorts of crap to get ready to kill the Night King. So I thought that. I thought it was thematically appropriate, and the whole thing with the dagger that, like, in a way started the plot line, started the plot of the whole series, being that, that dagger being the one that killed him, that was cool as well, but it was also kind of like, the Night King never spoke a word of dialogue, like, what did he want exactly? Like, kind of unclear. Why was he, like, what did he want with Bran, and did he and Bran have something in common? Like, all those questions were just never answered.
Yeah, it was definitely sort of a letdown. And I also thought, like, it's almost like a cliche to have these sci-fi plots where it's like, oh, if we only kill the original zombie, all the other zombies suddenly die.
Yeah.
And once you know that is, like, the rule, it telegraphs exactly how it's going to end.
Yeah.
And was certainly the case here, where it's like, it looks like all is lost, but then out of nowhere, we kill the mother spider and all the other spiders die. And so I kind of wish they had done something a little more creative on that end. And it seems like the Night King ended up not being very important, which was probably the biggest sin of that. And even after the battle, it's like, oh, we still have half our guys. It's like, are you sure? Because watch the episode. It seems like pretty much everyone got wiped out.
Yeah. From the episode, it seemed like the entire Dothraki horde was destroyed, and then
we're like half the guys on the other side of the castle or something.
Yeah, that was weird. So I wasn't crazy about that episode, and but I did like the majority of the other episodes of the season. I think. I mean, the whole episode, the previous episode I thought was really good, and had Dany going heel or whatever was surprising to me, and looked really cool, even though it was just showing something really horrible. It seemed like they did an incredible job making it look realistic that they're destroying this town and burning people alive. And
like legitimately frightening and terrifying in a way that the show was not always able to pull off. I mean, it was sort of visceral in. I mean, it's sort of bad taste to make this comparison, but it's inevitable. Like, it felt a lot like footage of 9/11, with
yes,
shocked people covered in ash walking around the streets, which I'm sure was a comparison they were aware of, but it felt disturbing in a lot of the same way that did. And I think that was in terms of driving home what they were trying to drive home. They were very effective in making, what Dany did, like, completely terrifying and horrifying.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you remember in the first couple seasons of the show, like, the battles were usually like off camera, and you would just see the aftermath. Like, they didn't have the budget to stage these things.
Tyrion gets knocked out at the beginning of the battle, and then
exactly. And so I don't think there's a big battle until like season 4 or 5. So
there's like the Battle of Blackwater, which looking back at it seems a little small by the standards of the series, but that was sort of, I guess, the one they had saved their budget for in season 2.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's true.
But yeah, there's sort of an escalation throughout the series, building up to this of more and more spectacle as their budget increases.
And I mean, I can't remember a previous screen presentation of a city like being destroyed like this in any medium. Maybe, I'm sure there are examples, but like you get the sense that this is a real thing that's happening, even though it involves a dragon spewing fire. And there were all these. So then you had all these other moments in that episode, some of which I think, like, so the Clegane fight, the Clegane Bowl, as the fans termed it, people. I think everyone liked that. It looked cool. The fact that they went to death, they filtered their death together into fire was cool. And it was like fan servicey, but it still like felt like part of the show.
It was stylishly executed, but I did feel like it was probably my least favorite part of the episode, to be honest.
Really?
It was because there were sort of like no stakes for the story. You knew as soon as the fight started they were probably both going to die, and Cersei has already fled, so it doesn't really matter for her. Like, in contrast to the Mountain and the Viper, where like Tyrion, who was I think everyone's favorite character at the time, like his fate hangs in the balance, and so that fight ends up, it feels so weighty as to what the outcome is, and when the outcome unexpectedly turns, it's very sickening and horrifying. Whereas this, it's sort of like, all right, like, we like the Hound, but we sort of like know where this is going, and even if it's not going there, it doesn't really matter at this point. So it felt like a little bit like, hey, Clegane Bowl, and I was sort of like, hey, let's get on with it.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense to me. The Hound is a character we kind of come to care about, and they spend a lot of time with him and humanizing him. Whereas the Mountain is this like Frankenstein killing machine. But just in terms of like the spectacle on screen, I thought it was good. And there's the scene where they're on the staircase where like half of it has collapsed away, and so you can see the sky. And I think you see the dragon also. That was a really cool shot.
This is a weird comparison, but it reminded me a lot of that video game Soul Calibur.
Don't know it.
I think it was for Dreamcast back in like 1999.
Okay.
But there was a stage where it was like a castle that was burning down in the background, and it was like very the same aesthetic. I know that's sort of a weird touchstone, but
and then you had the death of Jaime and Cersei, and I think this from what I saw online, people weren't happy with this. They weren't happy that Cersei, the like kind of one of the most purely evil characters in the show, was just killed by bricks. Or I saw one tweet that was like, she was killed by gravity, like that's it. Where they wanted her to suffer, and something like when Ramsay Bolton was eaten alive by dogs. Right. And then like Jaime, like I think it was a legit criticism that was like, why did Jaime decide to go back once he'd already left? He had made love to Brienne and seemed to have some sort of like actual relationship with her, and then decide to go back. I think the characters, it was always shown that like they only loved each other, and those were each was the twisted mate for the other, and would protect the other above all costs. And so the fact that they like die wrapped in each other's arms and are entombed in the like rubble from the palace that they like fought so hard to have, and that Cersei's bad decisions caused to collapse around them, I thought was did have some poetic significance. And so I was cool with her getting killed by bricks.
That was the word that was kind of in my mind too, where it felt like it was a poetic end. And I'm not really sure what would have been better. I take it back when I say Clegane Bowl was my least favorite part of the episode. My least favorite part of the episode was Euron fighting Jaime, which I thought was...
Yeah, I forgot about that. And we talked about Euron in our previous episode. Why did they bring him in?
Would anyone complained if he had just been blown up by a dragon and it was like, oh, that's the end of Euron? Yeah,
and why did... Yeah, I mean, it kind of seemed like, Jaime gets like stabbed a couple times, so it seems like... And Euron proclaims, like, I killed fucking Jaime Lannister or something before he dies. So it kind of seems like Jaime is going to bleed to death unless he medical treatment, and Qyburn isn't around anymore, so no one's going to give it to him. So he's kind of like like Walking Dead, and so there was that plot point. But yeah, I don't think the Euron stuff added much, and maybe they could have figured. I mean, what
for all the super Euron super fans out there, just like another 5 minutes of Euron. It's just
I guess some people like him because he kind of seems like he's from a different TV show. And but
I give the actor credit for at least having a lot of fun with the role.
He gave a very big performance. And then there were people who were predicting that like the Iron Islands were going to play a big role in the end of the show because like the White Walkers couldn't cross over water, and so that was one prediction. And in the end, I mean, Theon is an important character, but all the stuff that happens related to the Iron Islands doesn't really make any difference in the story. So I don't know why that was there. I mean, it's hard. George R. R. Martin obviously planned out some stuff like crazily far in advance, and the Hodor plot line is evidence of that, but maybe he didn't really know what he was doing and isn't like the puppet master in all respects. And
I'll be very interested to see exactly how the books end up diverging from what we've seen already, up to and including some things that I suspect George R. R. Martin had told them was going to be in the later books. I'm not sure if we're still going to see that. If this is how he told them the books were going to end, I sort of doubt that this is how the books will end.
Yeah, if Martin sees that the fans are pissed off, and he has, another decade and a half to work on these things at the rate he's going, like, is he going to change some stuff? And yeah, I mean, like, in the you have not read the books, right? But you're kind of vaguely aware of what they are. In the books, Theon doesn't rescue Sansa; he rescues the false Arya.
Right.
Who is this character that never appears in the show? Someone they pretend it's like a noble girl from Winterfell who they pretend is Arya to marry to Ramsay Bolton, I think. So that's like the end of that book is them escaping. So that plot line is very different. But okay, so is there anything else before returning to the finale? Is there anything else from the rest of the season you would want to make comment on?
I think the reason the penultimate episode worked so well was they really did do a lot of work misleading the audience in terms of what would happen in that episode, where you sort of have these very formidable array of Cersei's forces laid out, and we've seen them just shoot down the dragon. And I thought it was actually very smart to then cast all of that aside and have the battle be just like, as soon as it starts, you know exactly what's going to happen, and that Cersei has no chance of winning. And I think that was a little, at least in commentary I've seen, it's a little underappreciated how crucial that was in terms of selling that twist. Whereas if it had been a close-fought battle, or there was a lot of drama, or like a bunch of arrows narrowly missing, I think it would not have felt as impactful as having done the work to say, oh, we put you on your back foot by making you think that this was going to be a different kind of battle than it was.
Yeah, I mean, when they killed the second dragon, it was kind of like, could they like not fly higher? And like it just seemed like they weren't thinking very, very much about how to use this revolutionary technology, battle technology of a dragon.
If nothing else, you should have a huge reconnaissance advantage. You should have the giant ships ambush you.
And they could have had Bran warg into one of the dragons. That was a fan theory that didn't happen. I think I guess in general, most fan theories don't happen, but this one in particular seems like the fans who are predicting stuff mostly got it wrong. I guess I'm not like reading the web forums or something, but aside from the thing that was very obvious about to the super fans about Jon being the child of Rhaegar and Lyanna, like kind of after that, a lot of the things that I remember reading as possibilities didn't happen. So a lot of people waste their time, but at least they probably had fun while thinking about all the crazy things that could have happened in this universe. And
who knows, it might play out in the books,
That's true. And I had a pet theory that there was Howland Reed, who's the father of the two kids who help Bran go north of the Wall. He's alluded to in the books, and he seems like he's playing some sort of big role. And but you never, and he's there when at the Tower of Joy. So yeah, it seemed like he was going to have some key role to play, but he didn't. We never met him. We never got to see his magical world of where it's kind of like the castle that floats around in a giant bog. And so, yeah, there were a lot of red herrings, I guess, is the way to put it.
Yeah, with him in particular, I guess I would imagine in the books he'll end up being able to verify Jon Snow's parentage in a way that no one really seemed to ask for, kind of curiously, in the show, where there's like, oh yeah, Bran confirmed it. It's like, well, did he? Like, he's a weird psychic.
Well, okay, let's take that point, actually.
Everyone just sort of like accepts it and moves on. Like, yeah, of course, he's a Targaryen.
Right. So yeah, so that's the big, like, it's kind of central mystery of the books and show, is that Jon is actually the legitimate heir to the throne. But the way it played out, like, did that matter at all? You know, he never, they're never like, well, he belongs on the throne because he is the true heir. Like, they never even mention that. And then, you know, I guess it adds to the fact that, like, Dany is kind of suspicious of him, but then he's the one who killed Dany. So the suspicions obviously didn't help her. And yeah, it kind of seems like, you know, there was a moment that I thought was maybe going to be important when the dragon is destroying the Iron Throne, and Jon is right there, and you're kind of thinking, like, is he going to blast Jon, and then is Jon going to be fine because he's a Targaryen and he can't be burned, or would he be like half burned because he's half Targaryen or something? But so the flame got kind of close to his body and he seemed fine, then that didn't seem to actually play into it at all.
Yeah, I think someone pointed out. I guess it's when he fights the White in season 1. There's like, he like grabs a torch or something and burns his hand, and it's like, well, he can't be a Targaryen if that's true. But my understanding is that in the books, the Targaryen fire immunity is not actually a thing, and it's sort of like a one-time thing for Dany to step out of the fire with the dragon eggs.
That's very possible. I don't remember that or not.
But it always seemed like it was a somewhat half-baked element of the show. This, like, oh yeah, and by the way, they like can't be burned. And whether that would apply to Jon, or whether that was only to Daenerys, or only to Daenerys in certain contexts, or whether it would work on dragons or not.
Right, and Daenerys' brother gets like burned to death by molten gold,
right?
And she says he was no dragon or something like that. So it's clearly not like the Targaryens are immune to hot things.
So it might be a recessive gene or something,
right? So, but yeah, like if Jon had actually just been Ned's bastard, would the show played out any differently? Like I can't think of anything that really would have been different. So I don't know. That's
yeah,
that kind of seems like some sort of failure of plotting to make this such a big deal, and then it doesn't really have an effect. But yeah, so what did you think of the murder of Daenerys by Jon Snow?
Just like, I wish there had been another wrinkle to it. It felt like it was very easy, and it was also very underdetermined, where like what would have happened if he hadn't done it versus what would have happened if he did do it. I guess Tyrion would have been murdered, but like beyond that, it felt very much along the lines of like, Dany's the big bad. He doesn't want to do it, but he does it anyway. It's the right thing to do because he's the hero. Mm-hmm. Which was not usually the way the show played things out when it was being interesting. I mean, they say, like, I think the back and forth in the show with him and Tyrion is like, love is more powerful than reason. Love is the death of duty versus duty is the death of love. And I was thinking about that because, you know, that certainly applies to Jon with Ygritte, where he sort of breaks with her because of duty. And I think, it's something that he regrets for the rest of his life, especially knowing how the rest of his time with the Night's Watch went. And so maybe this would have played a lot better if you sort of bought the chemistry and the love between Jon and Dany in a way that I don't think anyone really did.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of chemistry between the actors. I think that's a general agreement.
Yeah, and also, it's a little tough as an audience member to get over the, hey, but you guys are also, aunt and nephew, which is a little distasteful. Right.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people.
I wonder if they were
rooting.
kind of more invested in that to make it work than we were invested in that.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people were rooting for Jon and Dany to have an epic love story because of the incest angle to it.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there was those people known as shippers who try to imagine pairings between fictional characters and what their relationship would look like between them. There probably was, but yeah, I think. The scene where she approaches the Iron Throne, that whole sequence, even before the stabbing, was really looked amazing. The room that's half destroyed, the fact that she just barely touches one little knob or handle on one of the swords, and that turns out to be the only she never sits in the throne.
Yeah. So this I thought was an interesting wrinkle. There's been tons of forums for people to bet on the ending of the show, who will sit on the Iron Throne. And how are you collecting these bets?
I actually
she never sits on it. The throne is destroyed. You had money on Bran and the casino's not paying you. I mean, consider legal action, because that's.
Yeah, I actually
really
had the
same
same
exact language of the bet.
I had the same exact thought. Yeah, there's Ladbrokes or whatever, and all these other online gambling sites where if they're taking bets on who was going to sit on the Iron Throne, the house wins because the Iron Throne got destroyed by the dragon, which was not something I saw coming.
Does that count as no one? Is that a no action? I don't really know exactly.
I don't either.
How that plays out. I bet there's people angry about it somewhere.
I mean, if you laid a 300-1 bet on Bran sitting on the Iron Throne, and then they tried to toss it on a technicality that the Iron Throne was destroyed, I'd be pissed off. But yeah, so that whole sequence is really cool. Destroying the Iron Throne, having the dragon destroy the Iron Throne was cool, and you don't know if the dragon is going to turn on Jon or not. And the part where the dragon is kind of nosing Daenerys' body, and it won't come back to life, and then picking the body up and flying away was all really beautiful, and it's twisted away.
Yeah, and interesting that the dragon is still out there, and where's the dragon flying to? And I think that sort of at least gives it some sort of mystery and some sort of lack of finality. There's an aspect of this, I suppose, where you can say this is the end of Lord of the Rings, with magic passing out of the world, and the dragon is the last magical thing. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of nice that the dragon is still out there, and there's still sort of this magical element that still exists.
Yeah, and they mentioned that of where Bran is I'll look for it. So he's scanning, he's scanning the system, trying to find where the dragon is. And so then it's. Okay, so then it's a cut. So after the dragon flies away, it's a cut to black, right? And then we have some passage of time. It seems like a couple months, and then Tyrion is. We cut back to Tyrion with his beard hair much longer, and he gets dragged to the dragon pit outside the city, and the Council of Nobles. And this is the part where it kind of seemed like they had there was a contest for a fan to write the rest of the episode or something. And a 16-year-old fan had decided what was going to happen, because it a lot of it didn't make a ton of sense, but I enjoyed it. And I was I was fine with them going off on their own little adventures, and pretty much all the endings that they meted out for all these characters. I was
the poor Prince of Dorne, sitting there with all the stars of the show, doesn't get a name, doesn't get a line. His actor's probably getting an extra rate for the day. It's I feel like he got a little screwed. And
they had some they didn't need to bring back the oh god, it's the actors from Outlander, and I can't remember the character's name.
Ed Muir.
Yeah. They didn't need to bring him back and then have him be like a comic relief moment, right there.
Yeah.
Of him like always being a loser and not up to the task. But
I think the first thing he's done in 4 seasons, and you're already sick of him as soon as he appears. You're like, this guy again.
Yeah, and then the experience of that scene was like, you're like, wait, who are these people? Do I know who these people are? Okay, wait, that's Sansa. Like, who's that guy over there? Is that Robin? Is that him? He looks older. Like, I have no idea who that other one is. So it was, I don't know. It was like kind of cheesy fun. But
I mean, there's a moment where Davos is like, I'm not sure if I get a vote, and like, I'm not sure if anyone knows if you get a vote. This seems a little ad hoc. Like,
exactly. Yeah. So then part of this is the part where where Sam proposes democracy and is laughed down. So I enjoyed that part, and then you have Tyrion saying his little speech. And I think one other thing I wanted to know was that this show, at least in its first couple seasons, was like famous for like long monologues and like really like intense speeches that would like these long scenes of people like having conversations, and sometimes they would have these conversations would be happening during sex scenes, or it would be like in a brothel, so that became known as sexposition of the long monologues, while you would also see like a naked woman writhing around, and there were more of those long monologue scenes in this episode than there had been in a while, because like the plot had taken over and things were moving so fast. So you had like Tyrion giving these long speeches about duty and honor and love and stuff. And so he says that the like, what do people respect most is not money or armies or whatever, it's stories. And when that moment, I was like, that was when I was almost ready to like jump off the ship.
It's like I think we learned what the real power in Westeros is: the power of friendship.
Exactly.
Like
we had it inside of us
easy
all along. So then when he says it's the power of stories, and like who has the best story or knows the story is Bran, and I was like, oh my god, Tyrion is deciding that George R.R. Martin should be the king of Westeros because he knows the whole story and he can access any part of it anytime. So that part I was like, But I mean, if you were able, like, if people really did predict Bran was going to become king like a couple weeks ago, then like good for you, because it came out of nowhere for me, I would say.
I think it was on the Bill Simmons podcast. They were discussing the betting odds, and Bran was like mysteriously low. And this was before the season started. So I think the theory was that Bran was the Night King, and the Night King would sit on the throne, or there was some sort of connection between Bran and the Night King.
Yeah.
But I wonder if that was reflecting inside information, where people who had seen spoilers, or it had been leaked, and knew how the show was actually going to end were betting on Bran, and that was driving the odds down.
That's funny. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense, I don't think. Do you think it makes sense?
Yeah. It makes sense in the sense of like they spent a lot of time on Bran's story, and it's like, so it's good that they had him do something in the end.
Right.
But in terms of like this being proposed, everyone was like, oh yeah, Bran. Yeah, that makes sense. Like, it's really absurd. And especially since he's so strange and weird, and no one really knows him, and the North secedes immediately after he becomes king, which is a little weird that he's now king, and his homeland that he represents is no longer part of the kingdom.
Yeah.
There's, in addition to the George R.R. Martin world being sort of well thought out, it's also sort of like, I wouldn't say historically grounded, but there's sort of an understanding of European history or world history that a lot of the incidents of the books are taken out of. And this felt sort of divorced from anything like that. Like, there's not really a historical precedent for an arrangement like this succeeding or even being workable. I mean, it feels like, I guess it's like the Holy Roman Empire, where you have like the lords of several constituent kingdoms vote on the king.
Mm-hmm.
I
was trying to think.
If you did like a more sophisticated version of this, it would look more like the end of the English Civil War, where you would have like this like strong parliament and this figurehead king, and then that's sort of like your building ground towards democracy later on. Whereas this, it just sort of seems like, it's like we got a bunch of our characters here, and this is convenient because they can vote on it.
Yeah, I wonder if they I mean, I assume this is Martin told them this is kind of a big part of the series. Who's going to be king? I assume this is what Martin told them. But you could like, I remember when the Who Shot Mr. Burns thing happened. Like they like filmed or animated like other versions. Like,
and I had heard that they had done that for this. Where
So yeah, I wonder
maybe
if
it was like stills of every character sitting on the Iron Throne, and then they would leak them or something. I don't know.
They did. Yeah,
I didn't see anyone.
Yeah, I know there were publicity photos where they did that because like there's one of like Miss Sande that I saw of her sitting on the Iron Throne. But I mean,
right.
like if
but I think that would have been
if they had just said like, okay, Sansa, you are on the Iron Throne. Okay, Brienne, you are on the Iron Throne. Like it kind of.
Brienne's got a great resume. Honestly, I would have gone for that.
Yeah, I mean, why not? Why not Tyrion? Like Tyrion is the brother of the last like queen who sat on the Iron Throne. Why not him? But okay,
Ansari, I think has a decent claim. Bastard of the last rightful king.
Exactly.
Decent guy. Everyone seems to like him. Fast runner.
Right, he does. Yeah, he does run very fast. So then they accept that. Yes, Sansa decides on the spot to secede from the Seven Kingdoms. Kind of a big decision. But they're just like, okay, yeah, sure, why not? And
also, Sansa's rationale for that was that she was getting so much pushback from her own nobles, including Lyanna Mormont, who is now dead. So it seems like the fire under her is kind of no longer there, but she's still very insistent on doing it. But
that's the question of who like runs all these houses after everyone gets killed. Like who's in charge of House Mormont at this point? Like is there an even younger child who's in charge? I guess we'll never know.
Really badass 3-year-old.
So so I don't know. And there is this weird thing about like they talk about mercy and Bran kind of became like an automaton, or he has like a Buddha who has meditated for so long that they pass beyond the realm of human affect and like can see everything clearly. So that seems to clash a little bit with the idea of the granting mercy and like would you want a king who has seems to have no emotion at all? I don't know. Yeah, I wish they had somehow spelled out more like what Bran became, rather than just he can like see what happened in the past. Maybe that's it. He's
he can like also sort of apparently go through and change the past with like a large amount of effort.
Yeah,
but it's like a closed loop, so it's not clear if he can do it on purpose. And it would have been helpful if like those 2 seasons we spent with the Three-Eyed Raven had like involved any kind of exposition besides riddles.
Right.
Like even Bran doesn't really seem like he knows what he's doing. He's like, I'm not ready, and he's like, it doesn't matter. You're the Three-Eyed Raven now.
So I don't know. An interesting choice. The fans will be debating for centuries to come. And then So what else happened? Yeah. So Jon Snow gets. They decide that they'll pardon him for killing Daenerys, but he has to go to the Night's Watch. I thought that was I thought that was funny and clever, and it was sort of like there were people out there who were really mad at Jon because they thought he was being set up to be like the like man hero to. Like, oh, Daenerys is too crazy. Let's give it to Jon, the like guy who keeps on fucking up, but he's a man. So the fact that he's like sentenced to go back to the Night's Watch in a kind of like Groundhog's Day repeat where he can't escape, I thought, was an appropriate ending for Jon.
Yeah, and it's something that I realized they sort of tipped. In earlier seasons, where Maester Aemon reveals that he is himself a Targaryen, and I think I don't know what his lineage in the books was, but I think he was like the eldest brother and was next in line for the throne.
I think
was forced to step down for some reason and join the Night's Watch. So it's sort of you can kind of read backwards and see like, hey, maybe this was something that they were planting the seed for earlier on. I think they mention Maester Aemon in the episode, don't they? I can't remember.
I'm not sure.
Somewhere.
Although it's unclear what function the Night's Watch serves at this point. I think actually Jon says like it still exists or something when they say you have to go there, but they don't clarify. They're helping the wildlings go back to their homeland, but the wildlings are friends with the Northmen and the White Walkers are dead. So I guess they have to do they have to fix the wall? Unclear. What are they really doing up there at this point?
Yeah, Tyrion I think says it's good to have a place to just like dump the bastards and the criminals.
Yeah.
Which, well, I suppose that's as good a reason as any. But it's it's a little unclear what their purpose is now that the White Walkers are gone.
It's such a I really like the idea within the universe of this like band that is, you're like your slate gets wiped clean, but you're committed to doing this crazy thing for the rest of your life.
Yeah, it's like the French Foreign Legion, right?
Yeah,
like,
I think that was one of the bases for the idea. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know what they're doing. And let's. I think the moment where actually I teared up very slightly was the reunion between Jon and Ghost, his dog, or his dire wolf. And the fans are really angry in the episode where they parted ways because he didn't even like give him a little pat on the head. And
I think the creator said like, we didn't have the CGI budget for it or something,
which made no sense at all. They have the same actor. They have the same actor on a dragon. Like, know, they can have him pet a dog that's twice as they CGI to be twice as big. But it was very nice to see that reunion, and also with Tormund, who's like a fan favorite character. So I like all of that. And then then Arya decides to kind of like become an adventurer. And I guess backing up once again, I think I like that they were like, the show started with the Stark family as the key, like the core of the show, and expanded in crazy ways and showed all these other characters and families. And then the fact that they like telescope back into the remaining Starks, three of them or so, four of them, I guess, have been killed. But like we're finishing off with their stories. I thought that was nice. But I guess what did you think of Jon like leading the final shot being Jon leading the wildlings and the wildlings marching north? I thought that was somewhat cryptic.
My only thought was that it was a bookend to the very first shot of the series, which is the three Night's Watchmen venturing out beyond the wall, and it was just supposed to echo that and sort of act as a bookend. Because, I mean, like, what are they doing? They're just kind of, like, returning to their homeland and everyone's at peace now. Right? Like...
Yeah, that interpretation makes sense.
That
interpretation makes sense. They were driven away by the threat from the White Walkers, and, we learned over the series that they weren't, like, evil people. They just had, like, a slightly different way of life and didn't want to have, allegiance to... They didn't want to bend the knee to a king or queen. And so, like, and this, I don't know. I feel it's interesting that this just like a group of people who we don't know who they are, like walking through the snow, walking away from the camera was what they decided to end this entire epic series on. And I guess probably someone will come up with a better answer than what we have.
Yeah. Well, so much of what, there have been people who had really centered the White Walkers in their interpretation of the story, and this would be the central conflict when all is said and done. And part of that was based on the fact that, like, sort of unusually, the show begins with that scene of the three Night's Watchmen going out into the north, and I guess like. Maybe there wasn't a good reason for it to start like that, beyond the fact I guess the books also start like that. Yeah,
the books start with that scene, and it's mysterious what's happening, and then you don't find out really what is happening until, like, subsequent books in the series.
And the characters don't appear again. They all are killed, except for the one guy gets away and he's killed by Ned Stark.
That's the guy who gets beheaded by Ned very early in the book and in the series as having deserted his post. And I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that. But how do you feel about Arya getting on a boat that somehow has a Stark sail on it, which is a weird thing to have considering they're a landlocked power, as far as I understand. And heading west to parts unknown.
I think it's. I think people are already speculating. Just scrolling through Twitter for 5 minutes before we did this, people are already saying, "Oh, well, this will be the spinoff, or this will be the sequel."
Right.
Which I think would be really dumb. But having a sort of Star Trek of Westeros, where she's exploring all these strange new lands. Be interesting. It fits the character where I think that makes more sense than her continuing to be an assassin or her settling down somewhere. So in that sense, I suppose it's a good ending. I know from watching one of these YouTube videos from one of these book scholars who knows everything about the lore of Westeros, there's a character in the books who is sort of this female navigator, explorer.
I don't recall that.
I don't know the details. I'm sure there's people watching this right now who are who know exactly who I mean, or I hope. So maybe it's sort of a nod to that, another instance where the creators of the show take something from the books, which applies to a minor character and sort of retcons it onto one of the Starks to make the story simpler.
Yeah, I liked it. It did very much seem like, Arya's Adventures will be debuting in 2020 on HBO, and there already are other Game of Thrones series that are like in progress at HBO, and it seems like this will become like a Star Trek or Star Wars, never-ending font of creative properties. So
yeah, it'll be interesting to see how those do, because I think the one I had read about it's like a prequel, but 150 years before, so that none of the characters will be similar. And I think having that big shift is sort of a difficult spinoff to do. I think of The Walking Dead. Sort of at the height of its popularity, spun off Fear the Walking Dead, which I think is still around, but it was never nearly as popular as The Walking Dead because they were sort of resolute in not having any of the characters overlap and not having the time period of the show overlap and setting of the show overlap. And I wonder if, people will take a look at this and, it's not Jon Snow and it's not Daenerys and it's not these characters we know and love, and they'll sort of cast it aside as an after-end.
Yeah, the like Robert's Rebellion would be an interesting thing to do as a show, I think. Although I guess that would be like an immediate prequel, and that
would be long enough ago. You couldn't really have any of the same cast.
Yeah, some of those actors, like they had the young Ned in this, but that was about it. So I like Maisie Williams, I think is the name of the actress who plays Arya, and I would at least give it a shot if Arya's Adventures was a series. So then the third Stark child is Sansa being crowned Queen of the North, now an independent nation or whatever in this kingdom in this world, and that was like, I think she became like a fan favorite character. In the book, she starts off kind of like in the show being like annoying and starry eyed, and then as she comes to realize what's happening in the world, she becomes a more interesting character and you grow to love her. And the actress who plays her, I think, has done a really good job throughout. So it's like that's like the fairy tale. She gets the fairy tale ending of being crowned queen, and we don't learn anymore. So
there's something that's sort of, everyone kind of gets what they want, but there's sort of a twist on it, where Jon ends up, like in the first episode, he really wants to join the Night's Watch, and he's like, in the end, he gets sort of exiled back to the Night's Watch against his will. Sansa wants to be queen, but she wants to leave Winterfell, and she ends up being queen in Winterfell. Mm-hmm. I guess Bran wants to be a soldier or something, and he ends up being king. I guess that doesn't really track, but
I don't. Young Bran, I don't remember exactly. I mean, he's only like 9 years old. I mean, he just wants to like have fun, and he's climbing around the walls and stuff.
Yeah.
So
I think Robert says to him when he meets him, he's like, "Oh, such strong muscles! You'll be a great soldier one day," or something. Yeah. But other than that, we don't really have an eye to his future.
But yeah, so it's appropriate in some ways that the act that sets off the plot of the show really. Him getting thrown out the window by Jaime is like this little boy is the one who ends up being king in the end. So that's a fun loop to close, I guess, even though, as we said, there's parts that don't make a ton of sense about him being king. I like the small council scene was fun, and it is kind of like, again, this is like the fan gets to write it like
Yeah, it was very
like
fan,
Bronn will be
fan
master
service.
of coin. Like, okay, why not? And so that it was, that was just kind of silly. And you see that Brienne is now the head of the Knights Guard, or is that no King's Guard? I guess it would be called.
Yeah.
And Pod is there too. So we get some good farewells for them. There was the very cheesy part of Brienne writing Jaime's life story in the book of Knights or whatever. That I don't know. Did they really? That could have been cut, I feel like. And equally somewhat silly part, although they undermined it, of a giant tome being presented to Tyrion saying, we're calling this a Song of Ice and Fire, and it's a story of everything that's happened. But then
Sam all but winks at the camera.
But so that seems that was groan inducing. But then they said that Tyrion isn't mentioned in it at all. So then you think, which is, it's just funny on his face, but also kind of has a point about the historians are writing the story. But they don't necessarily know what really happened, and so we got to see what really happened. But in the world,
it reminded me a lot of. There's a name for this, but I'm not going to remember what it is. When there's a buzzy book that comes out in DC, like James Comey's book or something, and anyone in DC buys it and immediately turns to the index to see if they're in it. And it's funny that Tyrion basically did that with the history, where he's like, "Oh well, I'm immediately going to try to figure out where I am in this."
Yeah, that's funny. So that was the Bob Woodward first draft book of the story of the last decade or so in Westeros. And so I enjoyed that. What was there anything else? I feel like we've covered most of the moments from the finale. Do you think is there anything we missed?
I thought one thing I noticed interesting is in Daenerys' speech to the Unsullied and Dothraki, she sort of echoes Khal Drogo's disturbing speech after she eats the heart, where she's talking about conquering the world and burning their cities to dust, and but she leaves out the part about raping all the women and pillaging all the things. So I'm not really sure exactly what the significance of that was, but it's interesting that, I think people have very fond memories of Khal Drogo, but, even evil Dany was somewhat less evil than Khal Drogo was.
I think people have fond thoughts about Jason Momoa, and that probably is part of it. But in the book, it's made very explicit that Dany's 14 and on their wedding night, he rapes her. So, and they make it less rapey when they film it, and the actress is older. But he wasn't a good dude. But it shows that she imbibed some of the philosophy of Khal Drogo in the burn their cities part.
The other thing that struck me about that is it's in another language that they establish several times actually that Tyrion does not speak or speaks extremely poorly. I think it was even in 2 episodes ago where he's trying to get Jaime released. And goes to the guards and can't speak the language at all. Mm-hmm. So Tyrion and Jon both don't speak this language. They didn't really hear the pitch on conquering the rest of the world. They I feel like she might have needed to reiterate the idea of the.
That's a good point. I didn't think of that.
The People's Internationale roaming across Essos or whatever.
Yeah, there wasn't a simultaneous translation. Missandei is gone, so she can't provide it.
Right.
And but the visuals weren't great of her in her all black and the Unsullied beating their staffs against the ground 3 times each time.
It reminded me of all the things. It was most I think just because of the staircase and the sort of the composition of it, it reminded me a lot of the Apple 1984 commercial. But obviously that is also echoing a long tradition of totalitarian fascist portrayals on screen, and very much like the Hunger Games also, where it's sort of in this ruined world.
Yeah. I mean, just the production design of the show has been incredible throughout. They created medieval fascist a look, her outfit and the way they had the characters standing and stuff, and the set design was all incredible. So really, I mean, there's been problems with the plotting and the characterization, like occasionally or more than occasionally, but like I think the acting has always been really, really good, and the just the things that I can understand as a lay viewer, like it seemed like this is as good as has ever been on television. What do you think as someone who works in the industry? As like, is this like a new bar that they set, or what?
I think so. This is probably, at least from my perspective, this is the best respected show in the industry. This is the one that people would be excited to work on. It has the highest budget. It has people who are extremely good at what they do in every single department. The production design is top notch. The cinematography is top notch. The special effects are top notch. The acting is extremely good. The writing is, opinions differ, but it's certainly from like a craft standpoint, it's the best of breed. I did want to talk about one particular aspect of the production, which was the much ballyhooed coffee cup that was left. Mm-hmm. I've had that role on movies before where I was not a visual effects supervisor, but I was an assistant editor who was in charge of making sure visual effects shots were properly tracked and got into the cut the correct way. And this is just like everyone who does something like that for a living's worst nightmare, is that you wake up, you're watching the thing air, or you're watching it in the theater, and I'm almost positive what happened is that there was a visual effect shot that was made for that. It is not a difficult effect to do, to combat a coffee cup like that. It's not something that would be easily missed in a visual effects spotting session. And that when they were finishing it, and they were finishing the show, doing the final color, an assistant or somebody forgot to insert the visual effects shot in, or inserted it in and accidentally deleted it or whatever. And just my heart goes out to whoever was involved in that, because it's the kind of mistake that, you spend your whole career trying not to make. You make it once, it's going to follow you the rest of your career. People will ask you about the coffee cup, and it could really, I'm not going to say it could happen to anyone, but it's everyone's fear.
Wow.
So.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it's interesting how, I don't know what a comparable kind of show would be like, maybe Lost or something. Like, I'm sure the super fans have picked up various screen errors in Lost where you can see the mic or the shadows are off or something. But there weren't that many.
What's sort of changed is over the last 10 years, it's become much easier to fix something like that. Like if you have a boom shadow, or if you have a reflection, or a crew member even who's in the shot, it's something that you can catch and fix almost 100% of the time. And so seeing something like the coffee shop, the coffee cup that's in the middle of the frame, I mean, there's no explanation other than it was some terrible oversight at the last minute. And I mean, everyone makes mistakes. Some of the greatest movies in the world have had continuity errors or visible equipment or something like that. It's hard to think of a more high profile way for that to be screwed up than the most popular show on television, kind of at the peak of its viewership.
Yeah, it's I don't know. It's obviously funny. Just the first time you saw it, I think they corrected it immediately in the update.
I think by the next day, yeah.
Yeah, so if you stream it on Amazon now or whatever, the coffee cup has gone away. So that's different than how things used to work, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's someone linked to a clip that's from the first season, and you see it's a scene in Winterfell, and you see a crew member or something walking through it, obviously a person in modern day dress.
It's in a North Face jacket or something, right?
Yeah, wearing jeans, and there wasn't as much scrutiny of the show back then because it was brand new and wasn't super popular yet. So these things happen. Okay, so.
And at the end of the day, as we say in the post-production world, if the audience doesn't notice it, it's not a mistake. So if, I think most people were able to watch the episode and not spot it, including myself. You're not really paying attention to that part of the frame. So all's well that ends well in terms of most people's enjoyment of the program. Obviously the nerds on the internet are going to catch anything if there's
this is a show where people are probably literally dozens of people going through frame by frame. Whereas
exactly,
if you're watching I don't even know, Billions or something, and there was some obvious something that was obviously a mistake, it might not be caught by anyone. And it did take a day or two before someone found it and posted it. Okay.
You don't want to be like the nerds on The Simpsons who are like, oh, I sure hope someone got fired for that blunder. Where it's at the end of the day something fairly minor.
Yeah, and the fan convention where the guy's like, in episode 23OF. So we've gone on a while, but do you have any general things you want to say in finality? This is, as far as we know, our last Game of Thrones conversations, because Game of Thrones is over, but there may be sequels down the line. Anything you would say to wrap up?
I think my big picture thought on the show is, I really like the show. I think it wasn't always the best it could have been, but at the end of the day, it was really excellent. I don't think there was anything else like it on television, and especially because this is probably the end of an era in terms of there being a show this big. It's hard for me to think of a way another show like this could kind of gain the same mind share going forward, where everything is so fragmented. Everyone is now watching things on demand in terms of there being sort of like, hey, Sundays at 9, this is happening. Everyone is watching it. It's been sort of startling how the convention on Twitter and on Reddit and online is there's no spoiler period anymore where you're not allowed to talk about the show. People are live tweeting it. People are talking about it immediately after it ends because it's just assumed.
Yeah.
Every single person is watching this, and if you're not watching it, you're doing so at your own risk.
Yeah, I thought about that too. If you care about spoilers, you are watching it live because it's it's going to be spoiled within seconds of an ending.
Yeah, I mean, I'm watching. I'm chatting from the West Coast right now, and we were at the San Diego Padres game earlier today, and they were doing Game of Thrones themed events during the game. They were playing the Game of Thrones music. I saw online the Padres had asked the players who they thought was going to sit on the Iron Throne. And, if the game had gone late enough, I'm sure people would have rushed out of the stadium to make sure they got home in time. And it's hard to think of any television show approaching that again. And maybe it will happen, but this sort of feels like, the end of an era. And shout out to all the recap writers who are probably going to be unemployed.
I think I mentioned last time that there was a piece in the outline about the industry of Game of Thrones recapping, and noted that there have been 2,500 articles in the New York Times about Game of Thrones in some way over the past 10 years, and
they're the highest rated articles at every single site that you go to. If they ever had those sidebars, the most read stories, it's always a Game of Thrones recap. I saw, oh God, I can't remember what the article was, but there was an interesting article in Scientific American, of all things, about Game of Thrones. And that was one of the most read stories on their website. And, it doesn't matter what your publication is across all media. Those were the sort of the moneymaker.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I mean, what are we doing here? We're providing content related to Game of Thrones. And so, yeah, what will there be another TV show that replaces it? You can maybe imagine a movie taking a similar cultural position, but not something that has spooled out more or less yearly for 8 or 9 or 10 years. That does seem like it's not going to happen again.
Yeah, there seems to be a similar kind of takes industry around Star Wars and around the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which I don't follow, but those are once a year events at this point for a television show. I don't know if it's really positioned to do that again.
So I think you're probably right that we're not going to see something like this again, or at least soon. And is it? What what is the magic of Game of Thrones? Probably something that lots of people have weighed in on, and it's something to do with the like you said, the subversion of the fantasy tropes, and we all know the traditional fantasy stories, and Martin found a novel, to me at least, way to mix those with realistic human dilemmas, and then just all the stuff that we mentioned about the high quality of the production and the casting and the acting, and just all the crazy details that go into like creating this world that where they have to like invent everything, like every article of clothing and things that people are carrying around with them, like swords and shields and stuff. They have to like build everything from scratch. It's crazy. Yeah. It's crazy just to reflect on how much human effort went into creating this storyline about dragons and sword fights and and stuff like that's normally considered for children. So yeah, I guess I don't know if I have anything else, and it is after midnight here on the East Coast. So Michael, thank you for reacting to Game of Thrones season 8 episodes on Blogging Heads for us.
Thank you for having me on. It was a blast.
And so, if people want to follow you on Twitter, I think I know your handle. It is MTSW.
That's correct.
And mine is ARYHCW. Last time I said Valar Doharis or Margolis. I actually can't remember this point. But what are there any other farewells? They say wish you
luck in the war,
in the wars to come, or something.
The wars to come.
Right. So yeah, all of our viewers, good fortune in the wars to come. Michael, thank you again, and we'll see you all again some later time.
Thanks, Arya.